whatever. So good afternoon. My name is Christy Kallevig, and I'll put this up here. So I'm a local girl. I'm originally from Comfrey. I was just sharing that I'm a graduate of the class of '96. Moved away for a few years. My husband and I farmed up by Belgrade. And when my dad passed away in 2020, we came back home and took over my family farm. And so my husband, Alan, and I now, every morning before I do this extension gig and get, like cleaned up and stuff, I look like that. And that's actually clean because it was winter. And so other stuff couldn't come flying at me. But yeah, we have a cow-calf operation in addition to corn and soybeans. And then we're taking care of these two things in the middle here, our 15-year-old, almost 16-year-old daughter, Lily, who will be a sophomore next week at Sleepy Eye Public. And then our dog, Charlotte, who my daughter said that I had to include the dog if I was including her in my introductory slide. So, and as Joe said, I'm with University of Minnesota Extension. I work in the area of leadership and civic engagement. I have worked with Extension for 6 years. Prior to that, I was a social worker. So it seems like kind of an interesting transition, but that's the transition that I made. But I love being able to help people find the things that they do well and build upon those. And so, I guess that's probably, what drew me to social work, and then what also has brought me into Extension. I worked with the Minnesota Ag and Rural Leadership Program for several years, and now I'm transitioning into leadership of all of our bridging programs. So Bridging Brown County, Connecting Nicollet County, programs like that you may have heard about. Katie Rasmussen retired in July, and so I'm stepping into all of those programs and very excited to be involved with those. So that's a little bit about me. And today, as Joe said, I'm here to talk to you about conflict. And Joe got to hear a presentation that I did. I did a week-long series. So within Extension, in addition to these leadership programs that I do, I also do a lot of online education and content development. And one of the things that I do is a quarterly refresher series. And so it's 30 minutes in the morning where we talk about one topic all week. And recently we did one on conflict. And people were really curious, why on earth did we commit an entire week to talking about conflict? And really, it's because it's something that we all have to deal with, but nobody's prepared us to deal with, right? There's not a class that my daughter will take in high school or that I took in college, or even when I went and got my master's, that was like, here's how you fix conflict. Sadly, that's not something that there is. But when you're in leadership positions, whether it's community leadership or in owning a business, it's something that you're expected to do. And research is finally catching up with the fact that we're not preparing people adequately for that. And so it's really important that we think about it and kind of hone those skills so that we can take care of our own well-being. Worldwide, the World Health Organization shared some data that $1 trillion a year, $1 trillion a year is spent addressing issues related to our well-being. So around anxiety, depression, and all of those other mental health issues that we face that can be directly attributed to how we navigate conflict. So that's a lot of money that's being lost because we're not taking care of ourselves and recognizing how we can handle conflict. Also, as we think about the Great Resignation, we know that one of the reasons people are citing for leaving their jobs is because of conflict that has not been handled or resolved effectively. And so if you want to retain those employees, it's important that you know how to handle conflict and navigate those situations. Also, productivity. When conflict is not addressed, it directly impacts productivity. Forbes released some data that looked at large corporations. Over $1 million a year was lost due to productivity decreases related to conflict. So it's important that we think about it, even though we might get a little squeamish as we think about it. And so Webster has this just very analytical definition, I think, of conflict, where it is, it's just this action. It's when things aren't compatible. But really, conflict is so much more. So if you were creating a definition of conflict, what words would you use? Shout them out. This is the interactive part.
Stress.
Stress.
Disagreement.
Argue, disagreement. Others?
Uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable. Stomach ache. Headache. Right? All of those bad words are pretty easy to come up with. However, what we do know about conflict is that it is certain. Anytime you have more than one person in a room, and my husband would say that I can find a way to argue with myself. So maybe you just have to have one person in a room, you're gonna have conflict, right? And it's hard, it isn't easy because we don't know how to navigate it very well. It's often invisible. You know, how many times have we been in those meetings or those workplaces where you can feel something under the surface, but you can't quite put your finger on it? It's likely related to conflict. It's also necessary because it actually allows us to move forward with change. We have to have a little conflict in order to get and implement some changes. It's also relationship building. When it is done well, it can help us to deepen our relationships, to build trust in a way that we can't otherwise, and really strengthen the connections that we have. You know, think back to, so come for a tornado. You guys actually know what that means. You know, I think about that community and there was a conflict there. It was us against the tornado. You know, as that community was cleaning up, you know, it went through our cattle yard and all of that. And so, you know, even out in the country, as my parents were going and helping cut cows out of barns at the neighbors and that kind of thing, the whole community came together, right? We built relationships in ways we saw neighbors that we hadn't talked to in years because it was us against some force of nature. And that's how it can be in your organization if you navigate conflict effectively. So when you think about conflict in your organization right now, what does it look like? How do you know if conflict is there? Like what are the symptoms, if you will?
Sometimes silence.
Yes, yes. Passive aggressive silence, right? Yeah. That Minnesota, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Fine. What other things do you notice that give you a sense that, oh, something's not quite right?
When you're
Yeah.
talking.
Yeah, yeah. People avoid you maybe a little bit in the hallway, things like that. So the Society of Human Resource Management put together this really great list that highlights the top 8 symptoms or signs of conflict. And I often tell folks that when you're thinking about conflict, it's really like you need to be a detective. You need to dig and start to look and see what's going on. So, you know, there might be that decrease in productivity. You might see some quality issues. I looked at some manufacturing data that was amazing. So I should also have prefaced, I'm a little bit of a data geek. I can look at studies for hours. But there was some manufacturing data that showed the way they could trace products. And if a product had a recall or there was a failure in a system, if they went back, they could see that there was a conflict between people on that line or on that production team. And so you're going to have some quality issues. High turnover, excessive absenteeism, dysfunctional meetings, I'm fine as people sit down, but also that anxiety and stress that shows up. Now, 7 and 8, the complaints and changes in peer interactions, those will be the last 2 things to show up, okay? Everything else will happen and you can say that it was because of something else. You know, well, people aren't showing up for work because, you know, those millennials, those digitals, whatever, it's just they don't want to work. Well, there might be something else at play, okay? This meeting isn't working well because nobody's committed to the cause. That might not be it. There might be something else at play. So these are some good signs for you to think about. that would be your first step to let's dig a little deeper. Let's look at what else is happening. So once you've noticed that there's conflict, once you've actually acknowledged the awkward silence, you've noticed the I'm fines that are being shared, then it's time to start thinking about what type of conflict you're dealing with, okay? We have two primary types of conflict. We have task conflict and relationship. Now, task is, I love how Brene Brown refers to this, it's the secret sauce, okay? Task conflict makes you better. Task conflict is when it is people versus the problem. It is people versus the idea, the project, the issue, okay? So here, your team is having conflict about what's the best way to approach it. What's the best idea? How do we do this? How can we break this down and fix it, okay? And that spurs innovation. That creates team unity. It creates excitement and energy around fixing whatever issue you're at, especially at the beginning. If you have task conflict as you bring a group together initially, that can be a great way to kickstart the work and really build energy and momentum. However, relationship conflict, that's the person versus person. That's the nitpicking, or, well, I don't want to do this because Sally's going to show up and I don't want to work with Sally. Okay, those are the relationship conflicts. And at any point that that shows up in a project, it's going to be the downfall. Okay, that is what is going to steal your productivity. That is what is going to steal your cohesion on a team. And so that is really what you need to be watching out for. There's also thinking about how you deal with conflict. Okay, so we've identified it. We've noticed that there's, excessive absenteeism, what have you. We know if we're looking at task versus relationship, but now let's think about how we're actually navigating it, how we are approaching the different situations. There is a tool, it's called the Thomas Kilmann Conflict Inventory, and some people might have done this if you've been in different leadership programs or what have you. But what this assessment does is it takes a look at what your typical style is for approaching it. And it does it on two different behavioral measurements. So one is assertiveness, whether you are unassertive or assertive about meeting your needs. Okay, so how assertive you are at reaching your goal versus letting the other person have their goals met. The other piece is cooperative versus uncooperative, or in simple terms, relationship, okay? How much you are going to value that relationship in navigating the conflict, okay? So our highest level of assertive and uncooperative, or not thinking about the relationship, is competing. And here it's where you're focused on you need to have it turn out a specific way. Now, this can be really great if you're dealing with things that need to happen quickly, okay? It can also be really good if you are thinking about like the health and safety, or if there's a statute that needs to be followed. Competing is going to be your go-to in some of those moments. If we're thinking about unassertive and not cooperative, that's when we see avoiding, okay? Where it's like, I'm just going to let this go. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm not going to acknowledge that this issue is even happening. This can be actually a really good style to use if you need to de-escalate a situation for a little while. If everybody needs to kind of have a breather for a moment, you can use avoiding as your approach in those times to give people the time and opportunity to think through what they need in this moment or how they want to approach the situation. So then if we come over to this side where we are highly cooperative, if we're assertive in that approach, then we're going to be more in a collaborating frame of mind, where we want to work with the other person and develop new ideas. We want to come up with something that is going to be a new approach and is going to meet our needs as well as that of the others. If we're unassertive, but still very cooperative and thinking about that relationship, that's where we're going to be more accommodating, okay? Where we're going to be like, that's fine. If you want to go that direction, that's okay. I was working through this with a group this morning, and we were talking about our children. And You know, it was like, well, accommodating might be where you're like, okay, fine, you can buy that pair of shoes. I joked that my teenage daughter, has anybody gone shopping with a teenager lately? I really want to know where the other half of the shirt is. Like that was my conversation with Lily the whole time. Where's the other half? And I'll pay for it. But anyway, so with accommodating, I might be like, okay, fine, we'll buy the crop top, we'll buy the jeans with the holes in them. However, I'm maybe gonna remember that I was accommodating in that shopping trip, but then the next time that I need somebody to do chores for me because I have to be going for work, I'm gonna be in competing mode. It's gonna be like, do you remember when we went shopping? Do you remember how that all turned out? I was very gracious. I also might be really avoiding. So yes, the crop top bothers me. It bothers her grandma a whole lot more. So, you know, I might have grandmas or great aunts be like, I can't believe you're letting her wear those clothes. I might avoid some of those fights because I also know she's getting her driver's license in 2 months, and I have a curfew conflict that I'm gonna have to navigate. So if I let her express her style, you know, and kind of avoid that conflict, again, I can save those resources and that energy for something else. So those are two ways that you can kind of look at how those show up a little bit differently. Then there in the middle, we have compromising, okay? Compromising, compromising style really is where I get something, you get something, okay? We're working together to figure out where we can meet in the middle. The thing to keep in mind as we look at these different styles is collaborating takes a ton of time, okay? If you want to use a collaborative approach in navigating conflict, you have to make sure that you've got time set aside for it. With compromising, you need to recognize that there's going to be time involved and you have to figure out what's important to you, okay? Because if you're going to give something up, you need to know what you're going to give up in that compromising position, okay? Any questions on these?
Would collaborating and compromising be the two most positive elements on that chart, or is there a right and a wrong approach either? Maybe a little bit about the difference between collaborating and compromising?
Sure. So there is not a right or wrong approach, and you will actually find that you will use all 5 of these in a day, in a week, you know, whatever. There's one that you might lean towards more. I tell people, you know, as we're thinking about this assessment, think about how you approach things on your worst day. When you've gotten like 3 hours of sleep, you know, because the dog was barking all night or something. What one do you lean into in those moments, okay? But you're going to use all of them. There's also not a right or a wrong one because each one can be used for very different things. So, you know, like I said, avoiding, people might think that that sounds like a really negative approach, but it can be used for de-escalating. It can also be people who are really successful with this style are able to figure out what is important. So if you are leading a department and there's conflict around 3 or 4 different things, you might be able to be like, you know what, issue A and B, not important at all. We're just going to avoid those for now. They'll resolve themselves at some point, but we're really going to focus on C and D, okay? So if we look at the difference between collaborating and compromising, collaborating, you are going to come up with a completely new idea to resolve that conflict, and collaborating is going to build and strengthen a relationship a bit differently than compromising will, okay? So compromising is really that 50-50, where it's like, okay, what would be an example?
U.S. Senate.
I don't know how successful of an example that is right now. But yeah, I mean, politically, when you have to come down and reconcile a bill, absolutely. You know, that everybody has to give up a little something. It allows for conversation. That's the other thing that I would say, collaborating and compromising allows for more conversation, where you're able to be a little more curious and understand the other person's perspective a bit more. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? So as you think about that, well, actually just go back. Who here thinks that they probably lean into competing a little bit more? We're all friends, we can raise our.
I'll be the guy. No.
It's okay, it's okay.
Like you said, we all do all of those.
Yeah.
You want to see where we lead, I don't
Yeah.
know. But I, you know, I'm self-reflect, I can see myself hitting all the boxes.
Perfect.
Definitely.
Perfect. Is there one that folks are like, I know 100% I am this? Which ones?
I'm more of the accommodating, but also, I guess, avoiding conflict in general.
Yeah. Does it work out for you well to be accommodating?
No,
It can be really
it works out for everyone else.
Yeah, it can be really frustrating and kind of exhausting some days, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, because yes, of course you can have the $1 million to do that project. I'd love to find that for you. I will write all the grants.
yes.
Right? Yeah. But it adds a lot to your workload. Absolutely. And but it also might help you to build relationships in a different way because people know that they can come to you with their issue and you'll find a way to kind of accommodate that and help them. You might not solve it all the time, but you're going to work to help them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else have one that you're like, yeah,
I guess it depends on the situation, right?
yeah,
It's a situational thing.
Yeah.
So if I'm dealing with my kids, one way potentially, my parents,
mhm,
coworkers, neighbors, it's people at the grocery store, it's the last box of, Rice Krispies. We both grabbed at the same time.
my goodness, when the pandemic happened and you had to fight for the toilet paper.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. No, but I mean, it's how you deal with different generations, it's how you deal with different situations. But really with these, it comes down to understanding what your typical approach is. So even recognizing that you might show up differently in different situations. So understanding that, and then know that others are going to show up differently as well. You might come in with this really great collaborative approach and sit down across the table from somebody who's all about competing. Okay, how are we going to navigate this meeting together? How are we going to work through this? Okay, but knowing that those different styles exist will help you be a little more prepared. And then, apply that information to your relationships. Okay, so thinking about how complex is the issue? Is it really important? Is it important to me? Is it important to the project? How much time do we really have? Because if there is one thing, like I could have done a 2-minute presentation on conflict, I could have come in and said, you need to give yourself more time. Have a good day. That's really all it comes down to, is that point of how much time do we have? Okay? If you have a lot of time, you can use a very different style and approach than if you need to get it done in 5 minutes. How much trust is there? And how open can you be about your needs and concerns, especially with compromising and collaborating? How open is the group? How much can we talk to each other? And just really, how much do you value that relationship? If you don't value the relationship, you can be 100% competing all the time and you can win. You just need to know that there's going to be repercussions down the road with that. So let's talk about the feelings that come with conflict. This is actually a word bubble from that refresher series that we did. And I asked everybody to type the words, the feelings that they feel when they're in conflict. And the bigger the word, the more people that used it. So, a stomachache, whenever I'm with groups, it is amazing to me how gastrointestinal issues pop up with conflict. I've heard other words than stomachache. That was really nice, but that was all we got that day. But there's those feelings show up and we just don't know what to deal with them. And sadly, it follows us through everything else. Emotional contagion is a real thing. Like people joked about contagion, and there was a movie Contagion, I think, in the movies, right? Maybe there's been multiples of those, I don't know. But I mean, it exists with our emotions. right? How many times have you walked into a room and you're like, oh, Christy had a bad day, everybody's having a bad day now. But I mean, when we're dealing with conflict, if you come into that situation tense and stressed and just kind of at your wit's end, that will start to permeate across the entire group. So it's just as important as it is to know what style you have for navigating conflict. It's really important to think about how you manage your emotions when you're in those conflicts. And that's part of having really good emotional intelligence. And so thinking about how you are navigating your own emotions and how you're taking on the emotions of other people so that you can be aware of that and handle that. So I have a few things on hybrid work. Is that something that is of interest? Or else I can skip over those.
What is that, your
Okay.
definition?
So hybrid in office or remote, like people are online. And it's one thing that I hear a lot, and I can go over these because they're pretty quick, but so if you have remote workers, or even the entire office is outside of the building working, you know, online remote work. So within Extension, we have offices, but 94% of us, I believe, are actually working out of our homes 3+ days a week. So that's kind of my definition of hybrid work. But people have been saying, well, conflict happens more often now than it ever did before because we're not in the same building. And often that's been the reason that some people have brought people back into the office was because, well, we're not getting along as well. And so this is just to show that they have been doing, Gallup has been doing some more research. Their latest numbers were that conflict is pretty consistent. I mean, there's a 5-point difference here, but really in the plus or minus world, that's really not that big of a difference. You're going to have conflict in the office. You're going to have conflict if people are remote. It's really how you think about how that escalates and recognizing that you need to be prepared for it differently. So because in the remote or hybrid space, you need to think about that lack of transparency is there, that people may not feel like they're getting the same amount of information. Context is really hard because you have some people that are typing, you know, paragraph long emails, and you have some people that are responding with an emoji. And so, you know, the context is different. Even what communication tools you have. You might have a group of employees that are texting or using Slack. Or you might have a group of people that are still picking up the phone and calling each other. And so even those communication channels are very different. And so the context that exists around those, as well as the fact that we shifted to working in these very new ways, and we never paused to set our new ground rules. Very few organizations took the time to sit down and go, okay, we're working differently today than we were even 6 months ago, much less 2 years ago. How are we going to do this now? We used to have rules for how we worked. We had rules for exactly what it looked like when you sat at your desk in the office and everybody saw you doing your job. We haven't done that now. And so that is contributing to some of the conflict that we're seeing in these remote spaces. And also proximity bias. Whether we realize it or not, there really is a bias that we tend to prefer people who are close to us. So those people that are working in the office tend to get different work assignments. They get different types of treatment or rewards. And it's unbeknownst to us because it's a bias that's happening in our brain and we don't realize it necessarily. So just being aware of that and thinking through how that shows up. Because it all impacts how we build trust. It impacts how we build those relationships with others. And through conflict, we're able to build it by having that commitment that yes, we're in conflict, but we're going to work through this together. We are going to figure out how to do this together. We are going to take specific steps. And I, as a leader, know that we need to do that. Okay? You're going to be consistent. You are going to show your commitment to handling conflict in a positive way as part of your daily interactions. And you're going to show compassion and empathy. Because there are going to be those people who have been traumatized by conflict in past work situations. One of the reasons that I'm in Extension now was because I made the decision that conflict was not having to was not worth me having to pull my car over on the way to work in the morning and like cry about going into the office. So we need to have compassion that there's people who have had really bad work experiences and conflict brings back a lot of those emotions. Or that you yourself have maybe felt like conflict hasn't worked out well for you before, and so you might be responding differently. So thinking about how that shows up in what you do. And it's also building an environment where you can have healthy conflict, because it's possible. We can have really good conflict that is successful for us. So thinking about how you define those processes and criteria. When we as a team are in conflict, this is how we're going to do it. This is how I want you to bring it to me if I haven't noticed it, okay? I want you to make me aware of it. So thinking about that discussion about how you're gonna make decisions and how you're gonna talk about conflict before it ever happens. It's too late when you're in the middle of it to have a clear head to talk about what you need to do, so you need to be ahead of it. Encouraging constructive questioning and feedback, okay? So encouraging people to ask those tough questions. If you haven't read Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, I highly recommend it. And this is a key piece of that. Creating a team where you are able to ask questions critically and that someone will not think that you're picking on their idea or on them, but making it about the idea, as well as giving feedback, creating a constant feedback loop where you're able to talk about those things. How you are going to have your disagreement etiquette so that you as the leader are modeling that you listen, that you ask curious questions, and that that's how you're going to approach situations. And then thinking about where conflict conversations happen and who needs to be a part of them, okay? A conflict conversation does not mean a 500-person staff meeting. It might mean that you need to have some smaller meetings, okay, or smaller discussions. There was one company that they actually, when they knew that there was going to be conflict on the team and that they had to talk about it, the leader of that team would have the meetings at the local ice cream shop. Because his thought was, how can you be mad when you have ice cream in your mouth? Right? But I mean, think about where you want to have this, because the spaces that we're in definitely contributes to the mood that we're in. So thinking about what kind of tone you want to set up when you're having those difficult conversations and who needs to be there for them. And lastly, I just encourage you, as uncomfortable and painful as conflict might be for you, there's such great value in it. And so don't be scared of it. Just keep practicing, because practice isn't going to make perfect, but it will make better. And so with that, I wish you luck as you navigate conflict, and I would love to hear some questions, curiosities that you have.
Have there been any studies regarding some of like what certain generations prefer this method or do better at this method or anything like that?
There are. I don't have that data like in my brain enough to rattle off numbers for you. Really, it is more about like communication styles. It's kind of how I would come down to it. Is that, you know, our more baby boomers that are still in the workplace, they want kind of that direct one-to-one conversation. The Gen Xers, which I'm of, we like to avoid a lot of stuff. And so the Gen Xers are more likely to kind of have that passive-aggressive approach to conflict, where then it's important to talk about communication styles and how you kind of call out or create those feedback loops, so that you can navigate that. And then it's really interesting to see that we kind of, the millennials now it's more and more is coming out that they want to know. They want you to come and talk to them. They want a healthy conversation because they want that professional growth. And they don't see that happening unless there is conversation about what they're doing wrong or how they can do that better. So that's kind of what I boiled down as I've looked at the data, but like I said, I don't have clear numbers as or pinpoint as to who does what. Good question.
Does your office provide any like negotiations, say if you have two people really, you know, at odds? No, okay.
No, extension does not do that. We do If you Google negotiation, extension will come up, but we do negotiation for farmers between farmers and lenders. We do like farmer lender negotiation, but we don't do person to person negotiation. Other questions? Thoughts?
So getting a couple pairs of boxing gloves and having them settle the conflict on the back alley, it's not really one of the, items of this.
Would not be my preferred approach.
I know he's worried.
No.
I
It
don't know
could be
what
really.
category that fell in.
You know, that being said, there's nothing wrong with like, you know, healthy stress relief events. So, you know, having a workplace paintball tournament, and if you just so happen to find that person that's, you know, giving you a headache, well-placed paintball, right? But I would not encourage that. But, you know, I think that that used to be, I don't know if that used to be an actual strategy that, you know, they were like, well, just deal with it outside of work.
In the military, I think they would allow that. you know,
Probably.
just go-
That might be why my uncle gives me some of the advice that he gives.
Exactly.
But you know, there are people that they need that space, or they need like a physical release to kind of deal with conflict. And so even one of the things that I will talk to people, if they're like, we just really don't know how to handle this in our offices, you know, I'll encourage like walking meetings, because even just physically moving, you can navigate things a lot better. And so, you know, you don't want to punch each other, but hey, let's go for a walk together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else?
I think the walk too, then you don't have to face each other face to face, so like you get like kind of tense, because then you're both going this parallel, and I think that's
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah. And that actually is like a therapist technique. I remember when I was getting my master's in social work, that was one of the strategies, was that you had your clients sit side by side, you were doing marital counseling
Mhm,
rather than looking at each other.
mhm.
So yeah, that makes sense with the walking. Other things. Well, if not, thank you so much for letting me come over today. Here are a couple of things that we have coming up. So if you need to run meetings and want to get better at it, we have a facilitation series that's going to start in September 12th. And if you scan that QR code with your phone, it'll take you to the information page. We also have another leadership refresher coming up in the fall, October 31st to November 4th, and that one is going to be focused on critical thinking. So how we process information. Thought it might be fitting as we get close to election season and we're overwhelmed by all the things in our mail. But if you want to be on our mailing list, you can scan this and it will take you to a form, or I can maybe even share a link with Joe. And then you can be, you know, in the know of what events we have going on for U of M Extension in the Center for Community Vitality. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much, and thank you for what you do for Springfield in the area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Because it is different.